Oh, thank you very much, Louise. Our third speaker today is Sadako Ohki, who's the Japan Foundation Associate Curator of Japanese Art at the Yale University Art Gallery, where she has been curator since 1999. She is perhaps unique amongst our colleagues working at American museums in Japanese art, in that she is a specialist in calligraphy. She co-authored the popular Kana Classic CD-ROM in 1998, and she also in 2007 contributed the essay Collage of Painting, Calligraphy, and Poetry, a study of Taiga's ink bamboo with kanji verse, in the Masters of the Brush, Ike Taiga and Tokuyama Gyokuran, published by the Philadelphia Museum of Art. She was the guest editor in 2007 of the Yale University Art Gallery Bulletin. That was a special issue on Japanese art in the Yale University Art Galleries. And most recently, she curated the very successful exhibition Tea Culture of Japan, which was well received both in the United States and in Japan as well, in the press. Her upcoming project is a collaboration with the Yale Center for British Art that will take place in spring of 2011, where she'll be putting together a dialogue exhibition of Japanese art in response to an exhibition of works by a contemporary British abstract artist. So thank you and welcome, Sadako.
Thank you, Sinead. My talk will be very different from the previous two examples or the talks. Very much concentrated on one work, or the two works actually. So the entitled Layered Meanings, Rai Sanyo's poem about Gion Nankai's ink bamboo on robe. Ink bamboo on robe, painted by Gion Nankai, a pioneer Nango painter and scholar literatus of the late 17th to mid-18th century, caught our attention over 3 decades ago when it was first introduced in the Japanese magazine Kokka, issue number 1030 in 1980. The robe on display upstairs is from the Packard Collection, and here preserved at the New York Metropolitan Museum of Art. The painting on a white silk kimono is excellent, and there seems to be little doubt that it was executed by Nankai, despite the fact that neither a signature nor a seal can be found on the robe itself. The painting of wide and narrow bamboo trunks thrusting upwards, embellished with the clusters of leaves of great ink tonality, raises a number of interesting issues, such as a Korean influence on early Japanese tanga painting. However, in today's talk, I will concentrate on a calligraphic scroll dated 1824, which accompanies the robe. It's also preserved at the Met and is currently on display. It was written by Rai Sanyo, a popular Kanshi poet, historical writer, and a scholar of Confucian studies. Actually, his the signature is over here, the Sanyo Gaishi Shuroku, hand recorded by Sanyo, unofficial historian, like today's term, like a marginalized historian. That's the end of this scroll. The postscript to the poem in Sanyo's calligraphic hand scroll, let's see. This is the entirety of the hand scroll. Of course, you know from the right top to going down to at the end. The postscript to the poem in Sanyo's calligraphic hand scroll is the primary source of the information on Nankai's ink bamboo on robe. Another important source is the preface to an almost identical poem recorded in the poetry section of the complete works of Rai Sanyo, or Rai Sanyo Zensho Shishu. Sanyo was active in the early 1800s during the Bunkai and Bunsei eras, popularly referred to by the shortened name Kasei. The Kasei era is considered to be the second flowering period of merchant class culture during the Edo period, the first being the Genroku era in the late 17th to the early 18th century. So when Sanyo died in 1832, it was still a few decades before the coming of the Black Ship in 1853, and 36 years before the end of the Edo period. The Kasei era, therefore, is often considered the last peaceful pre-modern period to exhibit literary and artistic excellence before Meiji Restoration in 1868, which brought the flood of Westernization. Sanyo established a private school in Kyoto, where he made his living by teaching how to compose kanji poems, namely poems which are written only in Chinese characters. By his time, the ability to compose poetry in Chinese had become a skill shared by many Japanese, particularly among well-educated townsmen in major cities. Compared to those who could read popular books or yomibon and compose waka poems, haiku, and crazy poems, kyoka, the numbers of those who were versed in kanji poems were relatively few. Kanji poems were often composed and brushed to commemorate special occasions like weddings and birthdays that marked longevity of 60, 77, and 88, and so forth. The poem on Sanyo's hand scroll was composed and brushed on just such an occasion, as we will soon find out. The poem consists of 30 lines of 7 characters, or kanji, Chinese characters. The 21st line, however, has 10 kanji. So in all, the poem is composed of 213 kanji. The text of the poem, recorded in Sanyo's anthology, does not match the poem in the calligraphic hand scroll of the Metropolitan exactly. In fact, some 17 characters out of 213 are different. But there is no doubt that the recorded poem is based on the calligraphic hand scroll from the Packard Collection. Sanyo was an incessant editor who was noted for making changes almost every time he had a chance to improve upon his writings. So it is natural that some words were changed at the time of later recording. For visual effect, the calligraphers often arrange characters or poetic lines freely within the column, as you can see here. So each column does not always have 7 characters. Sanyo began with a saturated ink over here, and the first 3 lines actually have 7. But then he started picking up speed, and some of the characters becoming very much, here is the saturated, but then one character to the next sort of coming together, and also the shape of the characters becoming much larger, or some of the arrangements of the characters are very much, disarray. In other words, it's not always the 7 in the one character, one line. Especially the character for this brush is very, very elongated. And here, the character for spirit, or the chi, or ki in Japanese, takes a lot of space. And this is the end part of the poem. Sanyo wrote only two characters of here. It's actually a 10,000-foot bamboo, and that's the last 2 characters. So he made only 2 at the end, so that you can see that this marking, this is the end of the scroll. And you can see many different sizes of the characters. Let's see. A visual study of the hand scroll tells us that this example of Sanyo's calligraphy belongs to a mature style of sure handling, and it came before his late and more animated untunneled style. The preface to the anthology, the postscript to the poem calligraphy, and along with other documents and reference works, give us rich information on the relationship between the painter, Gion Nankai, and Karakane Koryu, the man who commissioned the painting on the robe. Koryu was from Izumi Sano in Osaka. where he was adopted into the wealthy Karakane family, which had thriving shipping and rice retailing businesses. Koryu was a well-known member of high society, and he was very well-versed in such traditional arts and literature as waka, kanshi, calligraphy, and painting. Koryu asked Nankai to paint the robe for his concubine. The robe was greatly treasured by the Koryu family. Some 3 generations later, when one of the granddaughters of Koryu was married to a member of the Shimomura family in Kyoto, she was given the robe as a part of her dowry. Sanyo then was commissioned to write a calligraphic scroll about the robe. In the postscript to his poem, Sanyo mentions that he did not refuse to write the poem because Nankai had not refused to paint the bamboo, as marked in red on the screen. This is a curious statement. Why should one require an excuse to paint the bamboo or compose a poem? The contents of the poem will shed some light on this question. Although Sanyo lived 3/4 of a century after Nankai, it is not a coincidence that he should encounter the work of Nankai. Both men were not only prominent Confucian scholars, but also Nanga artists and literary men of untrammeled character. Nankai was one of the earliest kanshi poets to compose poems of literary value. His poetry anthology entitled Konan Chikushishi is considered the earliest kanshi poem collection to pioneer chikushi, or bamboo branch style poems. Chikushi style poems express feelings about human relationships, particularly with women, and about nature, unlike the more conventional poems that were religious, didactic, or documentary. Sanyo again encountered Nankai here, for he was definitely in the lineage of Nankai's expressive poetic style. We know that Sanyo was disowned by his father, Shunsui, who was a prominent Confucian scholar. Sanyo was thrown out of the Ohki clan in present-day Hiroshima Prefecture, and he was considered a heretic among Confucian scholars in Kyoto. He was divorced once, and he married a maid. These were unconventional acts at his time. As I mentioned earlier, Sanyo's poem consists of 30 lines. Each line has 7 characters except for the 21st line, which has 10 characters. While we cannot get into the rhymes and tones of the poems in any detail, I'd like to point out that the 21st line ends with a heavy sound of the 3rd tone in Chinese, shu, whereas most of the other lines end with the 1st, 2nd, or 4th tones. So structurally, therefore, the 21st line stands out prominently because of its unusual length and tone. It visually sticks out when written in printed form like this, and it also stands out when recited. This structural emphasis coincides with the unfolding drama revealed in the contents of the poem. The 30 lines can be divided into 8 sections according to their contents. Sanyo's poem goes like this. Here I put them horizontally, so I hope that you can follow while I translate it in English. Line 1. Long sleeves of twilled silk from wool as white as snow. Upon them painted bamboos thrust as if alive. Madame Shimomura from the North Hall of the Karakane family, in her wedding trousseau, precious without compare. Carefully wrapped up at the bottom of a chest, no one dared wear it. Her grandmother's thing, handed down by her mother. Line 7. Who could have painted such beautiful bamboo? The record states by Gion known as Yoichi. Ah, Nankai, was it he or not? For the man in the ladies' chamber, he painted the skirt of the robe. At that time, old man Karakane was a dilettante. On famous gardens, he composed splendid poems. Once he persuaded the master Nankai to stay at his mansion. The whole household rejoiced, waited upon him, and surrounded him like a human screen. Line 15. At times, with wine at his side, he dipped into the ink. Droplets make Xian rain from the movement of his hand. The brush, like a rising hare and swooping falcon, without care for where it might land. Clothes and socks of the same fabric, the brush abruptly flew. The fair ones stretched out silk in substitution of the silk canvas, facing straight at the skirts, here thin, here plump, contesting. Line 21. Sir, do you not know that formerly Yang Shen was exiled to Dian and Shu? On the pretty girl's robe always remains the scent of wine and ink. Men say, enough to wear down a man's spirit, but what the famous did was unfathomable. The lady still knows how to respect old excellence. What her family instructions urged was unlike present fashions. Nowadays, the eyes of rich young men in silk trousers are callow. She is willing to believe that ink traces are superior to fine silk garments. I made a song to sing of this affair. What coils in the bosom is 10,000-foot bamboo. On first reading, the poem gives a background of how the robe was handed down to granddaughter of Koryu and the excitement of the household when they figured out that it was painted by Nankai. Then the poet imagines the time when Nankai actually painted this robe upon invitation by Koryu and depicts with vivid imagery Nankai's calligraphic performance. Sanyo's excellent skill in composing kanji poetry is revealed in the use of concise and evocative words filled with rich historical and literary relevance to the past. Let us take the first two lines, for example. Line 1, long sleeves of 12 silk from Wu, as white as snow. 2, upon them painted bamboo, thrust as if alive. The poem begins with the Chinese character Wu, pronounced Go in Japanese, which refers to Jiangsu province, traditionally called Wu in China, famous for its excellent 12 silk. The first two characters together form the compound Goryo in Japanese, meaning Wu silk, which evokes an image of heavy, shiny, smooth silk that was treasured for calligraphy and painting. The first line of this poem ushers us into the world of literati and captures us with the imagined experience of touching a silky, long-sleeved robe of strikingly white color. Furthermore, the image of the white robe evokes women. With only 7 characters in the first line, Sanyo shows his excellent poetic skill and prepares us for the poem. The pronunciation of the first two characters, Goryo, recalls another character compound, Goryo, an abbreviation of Goryonin, a polite term to call men and women, and particularly the term for a bride, Hanayome Goryo. In the hidden layer, the rich image of women seems to exist from the very start. Sanyo provided a strong contrast in the second line, the painted bamboos in black ink on top of the shiny white silk robe. The bamboos take command of the poetic scene, their trunks thrusting upwards as if alive, clusters of bamboo leaves brushed in rich ink tones. The effervescent mood of the painting can be felt in a literal translation of the Chinese characters enclosed in red. The force of the bamboos wants to be active. Could we interpret this bamboo force as male sexual desire craving for action? Throughout the poetic lines, numerous verbal puns and literary allusions are studied like stars in the night sky. And we cannot go over them all in half an hour, or more like 15 minutes now, but allow me to give you just a few examples. Line 11 has 2 character compound enclosed in red on the screen that can be read as kozu or skigoto in Japanese, and it can be interpreted in 2 ways. At that time, old man Karakane was a dilettante, or at that time, old man Karakane loved amorous affairs. Let's examine the lines 15 through 20 that are a climax of the poem. 15, at times with wine at his side, he dipped into the ink. 16, droplets make xiang rain from the movements of his hand. We will go back to the characters. This is a bit complicated, so I put them in English here. 17, the brush, like rising hare and swooping falcon, without care for where it might land. The bodies, rising like hare and swooping like falcon, without care for where they might land. 18, Clothes and socks of the same fabric, the brush abruptly flew. Clothes and socks came together as the brush, or body part, abruptly flew. Line 19. The fair ones stretched out silk in substitution of the silk canvas. The fair ones stretched out themselves in substitution of the silk canvas. 20. Facing straight at the skirts, here thin, here plump, contesting. Facing straight at the loins, the thin body and the plump body matching. At one level, these lines describe Nankai's artistic performance. At another level, they explicitly describe a scene of physical intercourse. When his spirit rose with wine, he placed his wine glass aside and prepared for his dynamic calligraphic performance. The last three characters in line 15 give full flavor of an artist preparing to paint by dipping his brush into the black ink. The xiang in line 16 refers to the famous scenic spot in Hunan, China, where two rivers, the Xiang and Xiao, come together, as many of you may know. Its scenic beauty is commonly painted as the 8 views of Xiaoshan. These scenes repeatedly appear in Chinese and Japanese paintings, revealing a traditional Chinese art historical reference. One of these scenes is entitled Xiaoshan Night Rain, which is a scene of quiet, drizzling rain. Nankai's calligraphic performance is characterized in line 16 as his hand commanded the sprinkling of ink as if making rain in a Xiang scenic spot. In contrast to the quiet sprinkling of Xiang rain, line 17 is about more forceful, less controlled ink strokes. Rapid and strong action is fully expressed by the quick jumping hare and the swooping falcon. It is like the movement of a brush during calligraphy, which sweeps in and out of the paper, over and around the paper. Only certain points of this three-dimensional action culminates in two-dimensional traces on a sheet of paper. If you have a chance to watch a calligraphic performance, the wonder of where the brush might land is not an exaggeration. The Xiang rain and the rising hare and swooping falcon reveal the range of Nankai's calligraphic performance, from moist calmness to flying agitation. Wine represents lust and contrasts with the literary activity of ink, while the flowing and dripping of ink and rain in line 16 suggests moist secretions. The action of the brush in line 17 suggests two entangled bodies rising like hare and swooping like falcon. The brush at his command causes liquid to flow. The next two lines, 18 and 19, describe an artist's intent at work, as fair ladies stretch the white silk of the robe for him to paint on. Yet the phrase, clothes and socks come together, in line 18, makes more sense if you imagine the toes and bodies of two lovers coming together, while the brush abruptly flies. We can read line 19 as the weak-framed ones, meaning women, stretch soft silk for it to be painted on, but it can also be read as women stretching themselves out for the artist. In line 20, the artist draws strokes of bamboo on the skirt of the robe, some thin, some thick. But by implication, he says, straight at the loin, the thin body and the plump body matching. The poem is now too hot to handle. Sanyo cannot continue describing the Nankai's calligraphic performance. The kanji poem's potential vulgarity is shrouded in Chinese characters with double meanings. We are free to imagine Nankai bending his body over the silk, concentrating on the lower section of the robe with his brush, painting bamboo, with women in assistance. Or we can imagine something else. The 21st line breaks a flow and changes the mood of the poem. Structurally, this is the only one that has 10 characters instead of 7, as we have already noted. This line is a warning. It refers to Yang Shen, a 16th century Ming Dynasty scholar who clothed his entertainers in fine twilled silk and also painted in ink with wine at his side, and who was punished and exiled to Yunnan by the Emperor Shizong. By mentioning Yang Shen's cautionary tale. Sanyo uses literary allusion to return Nankai, himself, and us back from indulgence to sobriety. The poem introduces images of women from the very beginning, yet the key word that opens up a new world, which persists in the rest of the poem, is the line 10. The 6th and the 7th characters on screen is the 4th and the 5th in red mark, skirt. Its meaning is somewhere between the English words petticoat and skirt, and it conveys us to an intimate sphere of women. The 3rd and 4th characters on the screen is the 1st and the 2nd, lead us right into the lady's chamber or inner bedroom, thus developing the theme of women in privacy. We know, at least from the literary records, that the receiver of the robe was a concubine of Koryu. This line reveals that Nankai painted skirts for ladies or a skirt for a lady. The common image of stiff Confucian scholar is absent here. Instead, we see the human side of a prominent scholar artist, one who engaged in painting even the lower part of robe that wraps around women's hips and thighs. This was probably the reason why, in this postscript to the poem, Sanyo made that statement in defense of his poem. If a great literary artist like Nankai did not refuse to paint on ladies' skirt, neither would he refuse to write a poem about the robe. It is not my intention to dismantle the sanctity of calligraphy practice. As a lifelong practitioner of calligraphy myself, I'm keenly aware of how readily the soft Asian brush responds to a trained calligrapher's wish and allows the artist to reveal him or herself through the writing. It is as much about Zen meditation as it is about artistic skill and engagement in spiritual practice as it is in physical prowess. The point that I would like to make here is that calligraphy covers extensive areas of writing, from Buddhist religious sutras to profane writing, from courtly waka poems of sophistication to the chikushi-type intimate poems like this example. Today, in the art history world, the field of calligraphy tends to be neglected. With this presentation, I would love to revive some interest in the field of calligraphy, which is not only visually rewarding, but can bring great joy in unlocking the key to hidden and deeper meanings. And how insightful Mr. Packard was to have both the Nankai's robe and the Sanyo's calligraphy together. They complement each other so beautifully. Thank you.